Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me, and tonight it's time for the Big East Tournament preview, Mike, at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. We have been hinting that we thought this tournament would be a lot of fun for weeks now, and I would think that that might be right, Mike. We've got three teams in the tournament in the Big East. And then after that, there are a lot of teams that have won a lot of games. Georgetown finished last in the league with 6 wins. So every team in the league won at least 6 games. And with only 3 teams in the tournament, at the very minimum, Mike, we're going to have one team in the semifinal who's not in the NCAA tournament. What are your initial thoughts
Yeah.
here on the Big East tournament?
Look, the Big East, this is kind of another off year for that conference. But look, you never know what's going to happen in this league, especially if you look at how many teams have actually won a considerable amount of games. One team I never thought I'd say this to look out for is Marquette. Look, Marquette goes and they crush Providence on the road this week in Rhode Island, and then they come back, play at home, and they end up getting a win against Bobby Hurley and his Yukon Huskies, who at the time were looking like they were going to be a 1 seed. Doesn't look like that anymore. But yeah, I think that goes to show this league is just it's all over the place. It's chaotic, and something crazy could happen in this league. You look, a team like Creighton and Seton Hall is realistically going to be sitting there on Friday, being 1 win away or 2 wins away from an NCAA tournament berth that they wouldn't otherwise have. So I think there is a high likelihood of a bid stealer here in the Big East tournament.
And UConn did lose that game to Marquette. There is no suspension for Hurley yet that we know of. It doesn't appear that, he
Yeah,
looked like he bumped the ref to me, but the Big East has come out and said that he didn't. He has been
he
fined
said he didn't,
25
but
grand and all that. But
yeah,
it was really funny. Did you see the side by side of Danny Hurley getting ejected and then Bobby Hurley at Arizona State getting a technical at the
yeah.
same time and the quad the the fact that that lined up was really funny, but great job to that producer who thought of that and was able to do it at the same time because that
Oh
was really
man,
really funny. That was so funny.
it was crazy.
And look, Bobby is not going to be the coach at Arizona State next year, so maybe we'll see him in this conference, perhaps, or maybe on the UConn bench if one of Danny's assistants gets poached. But at the very minimum, Mike, we're going to have Creighton or Seton Hall in the semifinals. And then
Yeah,
after that,
2 wins away.
Marquette could play UConn, a team they just beat a couple days ago. We have Providence could potentially play St. John's, a team that they beat in that building already this year. And then we have Georgetown and DePaul in that 6-11 game. I don't know if they can beat Villanova, but how about 6 seed DePaul? Didn't think we'd see that coming. So, of this first round matchups, Mike, I think if we can get Providence, Marquette, and DePaul to win, we could see some chaos in the quarters.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I don't necessarily think we'd see Marquette beat UConn again for twice
Yeah.
in a less than week span. It's just one of those things lightning rarely strikes twice, especially with that big a magnitude. But Marquette has been playing significantly better. They've won
They've
3 of their
gotten in
last 4.
they've risen like 40 spots in the net over the past month.
Yeah, incredibly impressive stuff. One of those things for them, they certainly wish the season had one more month to it, and maybe they could wrap off a few more wins before the tournament. Look, DePaul's another interesting one. We haven't seen DePaul have anywhere near outside the cellar of the Big East in probably 2 decades. So seeing them up there is encouraging. They have lost back-to-back games. They've lost 3 of 5, but I think they're an interesting team. Look, I think the teams to really look out for, the one team to look out for in this first round of games is going to be Providence.
What's
It's a team
their
that,
where are they at right now? Are they bought in to try and make a run at this? Because Kim English has already been fired.
yeah,
He will not be the coach next year. So are they just going to mail this thing in and get back up to Providence, or are they going to give this thing one last shot? Because if they do, Mike, we have been talking about them being way better than their record all year. Um, I think they have
yeah,
the I definitely think it's possible that they could beat St. John's again. The first two were very close, and they probably would have won if they didn't get all those players ejected in Providence. Can they buy in enough to potentially beat St. John's and get to the semifinals. Because I think, Mike, when you get to the semifinals on Friday night, I think teams can start to believe that they can win it if they can get there. So
Yeah.
that's really what
Look,
I'm seeing at the top.
I think in terms of like legitimate Cinderella story runs, Providence absolutely has a chance. But like you said, they've got to be bought in, and we just don't know that level since that news kind of got leaked. They had a bad loss against Marquette. They lost by over 20 points, and then they classic Providence fashion lost another tight game to Georgetown on the road. So look, is their head in the right space? Look, I think they're playing a pretty vulnerable a Butler team that really isn't very good. Um, and we all know that Providence has been way underperforming this year. So I think this is the team that could pick off that. And look, St. John's has also been very inconsistent this year. Look, they're 18-2 in conference, and that's great for Coach Pitino. But then you looked at that game against UConn where they scored 2 field goals in the second half. Um, that's not supposed to happen. So I think that is a potential vulnerable spot right now for St. John's.
All right, Mike. Well, let's. I don't think there's much over the weekend we need to get to. Um, Seton Hall was close against St. John's. They weren't able to get over the hump. I know that the Pirates are going to want another chance at them because both games Seton Hall had a chance to win, and they just shot so poorly, and they were still in the game late, and then they ultimately came up short. And then in terms of the bottom of the bracket, Villanova's not. I don't know, like I think Villanova might have the least motivation of any of the teams here because they're clear of the bubble. They're a 7 seed. They already have some pretty solid wins. Maybe if they can win it, they'd get a boost because, I don't think they've beaten either of those two teams yet. But I think we could see some chaos in the top of this bracket. And then, at the bottom, if somebody can get through to the final, they should win it. But do you,
Yeah,
who's your pick to cut down the nets on Saturday night?
I'm going to pick a team that right now is going to need an automatic bid who get into the NCAA tournament. I'm going to go with Seton Hall.
Nice.
It's a team that has played very well against these top two teams in St. John's and UConn this year.
All
Look,
four
they
of the
lost
games have
all
been
four of those
close.
games,
Yep.
but they lost to I think UConn. Both losses are by a combined 9 points. In St. John's, it's like a combined 11 or 12. So look, those are two very tight games. Could have gone their way in either one of those, and they've also had a lot of games that were really tight. Regardless, that didn't go their way this season. They've had some disappointments. Look, they lost twice to DePaul. They got swept by DePaul. I don't remember the last time that DePaul swept anybody in the Big East. But it's a different DePaul team. They had a heartbreaking loss to Creighton earlier as well. So I think this Seton Hall team realistically is about 2 or 3 wins away from being a lock in the tournament. And right now, there's just no shot because you're either in or you're out right now with the way the Big East is going this year. But with that being said, I love them to get, third time's a charm, get that win against St. John's after beating a Creighton team that I'm not too high on, getting to the finals and then getting a rematch against either UConn or Villanova and getting the win there.
I think Seton
Love the
Hall's gonna
Pirates.
gonna get to the championship game too, but I'm gonna go with UConn to win it all, just so we don't both have the hometown
Yeah,
Pirates. But
the Pirates.
I
Yeah,
think they want it bad in terms of like what are Providence's motivations coming into this. I can promise you the Seton Hall will be ready to play. Shaheen
yeah,
always has his guys ready, and I like I said I can't stress enough like how bad they shot it against St. John's both times, and they still were close. They even had the lead
yeah,
at Madison Square Garden earlier this year, and then they, I don't think they ever had the lead in the second half at the Prudential Center on Friday, but they were always close, and hit their first three of the game with like 8 minutes left. But if they can just make a few early, I think that they can get that crowd going, and we might have
yeah.
a situation on our hands if we get to Saturday and the Pirates are still standing.
Yeah, absolutely. This could be a really interesting tournament. I know we've said that about a lot of conferences so far, but especially this one with only having 3 teams that are in just creates a lot more chaos.
Yeah, like honestly, it probably won't be the most interesting if it's UConn St. John's round three. Like both teams are pretty set where they are, and unless Florida takes a big loss, I think UConn's days on the number one line are probably over. Um, there's a possibility here for this to be something really really fun, with so many teams of similar caliber outside the top two, and then if one of those two goes down, then somebody else is going to be playing for the championship. So that is
Yeah,
all we
absolutely.
have for you today in this Big East video. Please check out the other ones if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.